Spectrovision Radio.
Welcome to Gods, Ghosts, and UFOs, the biggest podcast in the universe, where we talk about all the things they said weren't real. I'm here with the very best co-hosts a boy could ever ask for, Tom and Mallory.
Hi.
Hello.
All right, I'll admit that I'm more excited about some weeks than others, and this is one of them. We're going to be talking about actual psychedelic aliens and spooky Pentagon spooks, which, spoiler alert, it's a bad documentary about government-funded ghost hunters. But first, Tom, you've got the latest stats on paranormal skepticism in America, and I'm dying to hear your take.
You're going to, and fam, I'm going to go off. So
let's do this.
We start with an article from Gallup News published on July 23rd called Paranormal Phenomena Met with Skepticism in U.S., which begins like this. Quote, Americans are broadly skeptical about each of 8 paranormal phenomena tested in a recent Gallup poll. Nearly half of U.S. adults, 48%, believe in psychic or spiritual healing. Slightly fewer, 39%, express a belief in ghosts, while between 24% and 29% say they believe in 6 other supernatural phenomena, including telepathy, communication with the dead, clairvoyance, astrology, reincarnation, and witches. Now, I just want to jump in here and say that we have incontrovertible data on the reality of telepathy, clairvoyance, and reincarnation, like right now. But having said that, there ain't no party like an inherent bias party. My sense is that to some degree, people who've had direct experience with the other world or are close to someone who has are more likely to believe in this sort of thing. But we also have at least anecdotal evidence of people saying things like, I saw a ghost, but I don't believe in ghosts because ontological shock and cognitive dissonance walk hand in hand. But what really caught my eye about this poll was the demographic breakdown of its respondents. Quote, women, 40%, political moderates, 37%, and liberals, 35%, people who infrequently attend religious services, 40%, and college non-graduates, 38%, are more likely to be open to belief than men, 28%, conservatives, 28%, weekly churchgoers, 22%, and college graduates, 28%. There are not meaningful differences by age, religious affiliation, or political party identification. In contrast, paranormal skeptics are most likely found among those who attend religious services weekly or almost weekly, 78%. As service attendance declines, so does paranormal skepticism, as those who attend once a month are slightly more likely to be skeptics, 64%, than those who never attend, 57%. In other words, the self-confessed skeptics, men, conservatives, weekly churchgoers, and college graduates, are, to my mind, institutionalists who subscribe to, or at least were brought up in, a vertical hierarchy. So what this poll is most revealing of is American class distinctions, because it describes what patriarchal society has actively suppressed for millennia. That part of us that embodies soft power rather than physical dominance, subtlety over indifference, intuition over intellect. In short, the feminine aspect. In case you haven't overcome our benighted concept of gender binary, let me remind you of the Kabbalions' 7th Hermetic principle. Quote, gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. Beyond that, this Gallup poll, frankly, is a hot mess. Take the inclusion of astrology, for instance. Like tarot, it's not even a spiritual practice, much less a paranormal phenomenon. It's simply a ritualized, indirect method of gaining personal insight. Its inclusion in this paranormal grab bag is, I think, unintentionally revealing. The most insight to be gained from this poll, which was conducted in May, is what lies beneath the inexplicable inclusion of the word witches. without any kind of explanation. Just, do you believe in witches? And 60% of respondents said no. Guys, in America, there are literally more self-identified witches than Presbyterians.
No.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. This, according to a Quartz article dated July 20th, 2022, which reads, while the U.S. government does not regularly collect detailed religious data because of concerns that it may violate the separation of church and state, several organizations have tried to fill the data gap. From 1990 to 2008, and this is nearly 20 years ago, Trinity College in Connecticut ran 3 large detailed religion surveys. Those have shown that Wicca grew tremendously over this period. From an estimated 8,000 Wiccans in 1990, they found there were about 340,000 practitioners in 2008. They also estimated that there were around 340,000 pagans in 2008. I should say that paganism isn't necessarily a religion. Practicing witchcraft is not necessarily a religion. Being a Wiccan is. It is a religious belief. Although Trinity College hasn't run a survey since 2008, the Pew Research Center picked up the baton in 2014. It found that 0.4% of Americans, or around 1 to 1.5 million people, identify as Wicca or pagan, which suggests continued robust growth for the communities. For comparison, self-identifying American Presbyterians number about 1.4 million. So I want to end this with a brief history of the word witch and see if you can spot any patterns. The Oxford English Dictionary says the word is of an uncertain origin. It could stem from the Old English Wicca, which originally meant, quote, female magician or sorceress, and later meant, quote, a woman supposed to have dealings with the devil or evil spirits and to be able, by their cooperation, to perform supernatural acts. The noun could also come from a Proto-Germanic word, which I can't pronounce, meaning necromancer or one who wakes the dead. In fact, Old English had several words for specific types of witches, all female, describing ones who were skilled in the use of drugs, medicines, charms, and poisons, or summoning demons. Collectively, and unsurprisingly, the word witch became associated with, quote, an old, ugly, crabbed, or malignant woman by the early 1400s. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Saxon poem The Gifts of Men includes the word wickekraft, which means skilled with horses. That's for the guys. In researching this segment, I came across an essay called Nostalgia, Anglo-Saxon Poetry, and J.R.R. Tolkien's Worldview, which began, quote, the common thread that runs through Anglo-Saxon poetry, like the golden coils of a Sutton-Hoo's serpent, is the nostalgic pain of longing for lost things. In other words, make mead halls great again. The word witch had become so feminized by the 17th century that people had to start using gendered distinctions like men witches and he witch.
He witch, I really
Holler
like.
if you know a he witch. Most remarkably, in a 1250 translation of the Book of Exodus, the word witches is used to describe Egyptian midwives who saved the Hebrews' newborn sons. Putting paid to the pretense of spooky evildoing, it's just old-school misogyny.
Yeah.
I'll leave you with an observation by linguist and writer Ernest Weekly, who contributed to the Oxford English Dictionary. He said, the priests of a suppressed religion naturally become magicians to its successors or opponents. What do you think?
I think that the take that we're all responding to like a massive rape of the feminine, I think is fair. I mean, I think there's a great discomfort with a decentralized spirituality. And like you said, like the pole itself is revealing of the prevailing wisdom. That skepticism is more common for people who are benefited by the systems is very striking, I would say.
You're talking about the suppression of the feminine principle.
Yes.
Just think about the term wives' tale. Oh, it's an old wives' tale, right? And I've
never thought about that before. That's awful.
Tom, I think you mean an old witch's tale.
An old witch's tale.
A he-witch would never say such a thing.
Yeah.
I came across a quote by J.R.R. Tolkien, who was mentioned in that one essay I was talking about. And this is what he wrote. Pay heed to the tales of old wives. It may well be that they alone keep in memory what it was once needful for the wise to know.
Very nice. I also really responded to this idea, the data that seems to suggest that the more sort of institutionally comfortable you are, the less likely you are to believe in paranormal things, including witches.
Yeah, witches.
Also, I would love to know how the study was done, because like you said, I think that there's a lot revealed by the study itself. It's like someone just sort of off the top of their head wrote down the things that they could think of that seemed paranormal to them. Yeah, and so they were like, let's put witches in there.
Witches.
And
tarot.
Astrology.
Yeah, and so the group or team or the person who was in charge of or led the study would probably not be among the sort of self-identified believers in any of those things. Does that would you see? Do you get that sense?
It feels that way, and it feels very lazy, and it feels like, let us open the closet we've never cleaned of all the crap we've shoved in there. Oh, okay, astrology, witches, who, whatever.
Yeah.
Telepathy.
Kind of take a quick back of the envelope survey as a sort of
Where's the
academic exercise.
That closet labeled wives' tales.
Yeah. So, I think it's interesting, too, that there's this very obvious trend toward our slide away from institutional trust inevitably results in more openness toward paranormal phenomena. Tom, I have to corner you about the language you use around gender binary, because in the same breath you said something sort of disparaging about the idea of gender binary, and then in the same breath talking about how everything like feminine and masculine map onto everything.
Right.
So, which to me feels binary. So I'm not like, what is this?
They are not mutually exclusive. The gender binary says you're either this or that, and never the twain shall meet.
And there's no like, right. Okay. That makes sense.
When in fact, they're different sides of the same coin, and we each of us have masculine and feminine qualities. But, when comedians would make jokes about how they hate their wives, and how like women are soft and, intuitive and like submissive, and men are strong and dominant. And then look what expression we have of that now. It's appalling.
Yeah. So in my mind, a binary could be one of two things. A binary could be two totally separate, discrete things that are opposites or whatever. Or it could be two ends of a spectrum. And I think that gender is much more productively thought about as two ends of a spectrum. And so I think that's actually, frankly, really beautiful. And I think there's a lot of productive tension between masculine and feminine energies or whatever.
Yin and yang,
inclinations. Right? Absolutely. So
well, when you talk about bookends of a spectrum, you are talking about the Kabbalian's principle of polarity. Opposites are identical in nature and different by degree.
Yeah.
I heard somebody very wise last week talking about binaries and how whenever he finds himself coming up with a binary, he tries to come up with at least 5 options other than just those 2. They don't even all need to be real, but just to give the sense that there's a plane here, that there's actual space, that there could be more possibilities than just this pendulum on this plane. We might be simply approaching this thinking the switch needs to be on or off, or that this group needs it to be this way and this group needs it to be this way, and both are wrong.
Well, I'm happy that we have chosen to do a show about topics that are gaining in popularity. There's a long way to go, but we're on the upward trend, guys. There are more people every year.
We're just a bunch of fad chasers and he-witches. It does make me hungry, though. I immediately want to see.
I could use a big he-witch right about now.
Yeah.
this was actually a great primer for a lot of what I was feeling and experiencing as I watched Stephen Greenstreet's documentary called The Pentagon Ghostbusters. He's a reporter from the New York Post. And I could have done a deep dive on almost every single minute of this documentary to try and say, this is why I think he might be right, or this is why I think he might be wrong. But I actually think it might be better to just take a high view perspective on this and try and talk through this type of material and how one approaches this. I am fairly new to being at all anything but sort of passively interested in aliens and UFOs. Like I'm maybe like 2 years into being a person who's like, but actually what happened? Because this is the sort of documentary that I think could come across my feed a couple years ago, and I would have been like, oh, that's kind of a bummer that hearing, that congressional hearing back in 2023, that they were all just a bunch of crackpots. Because that is essentially what he's arguing here. This is his sort of thesis. A rogue group of paranormal true believers inside the U.S. government claim they've had close encounters with UFOs, ghosts, psychic powers, Bigfoot. I've spent the last few years investigating this group, and I've debunked many of their wild stories and claims. Beyond some spooky stories, there appears to be nothing. But despite this complete lack of evidence, this group continues to passionately push forward, faithfully believing that the truth is out there, and they want American tax dollars to fund their crusade.
Boo.
So...
Takers.
It's so hard because obviously I consider myself a critical thinker and not somebody who's approaching this with just saucer wide eyes, excited to take all information and immediately pump it into my bloodstream and believe every story about a werewolf that I hear. But I also take umbrage with this particular almost schoolyard bully tone. You know, like I'm just less likely to believe someone who doesn't seem to think there's any merit to any argument that is made that goes against the prevailing wisdom of the time, which right now would be, yeah, UFO people. Even though the conversation has been so active for the past 2 years, it's still more likely that if you were a bully on a playground and you said, that guy believes in UFOs, that's the person you're going to go and beat up. I'm just saying. It's like we're never out of that kind of mindset, you know, that there are in-groups and out-groups, and that this man, Stephen Greenstreet, has reasons, if he wants to be seen as intelligent, to be biased toward pointing out weirdos, which is essentially what he does. And he also points out a lot of potentially dubious information, of course. Things that I'm not saying anyone should just believe at face value. But the way he does it, you know, is like, this person, Senator Harry Reid, lifelong Mormon and UFO. And I'm like, oh yeah, weirdo. He's from a weird religion. So anything he does, don't believe. Or this person, one of the Tic Tac Air Force pilots, I think her last name is Dietrich. He was like, recently she was a keynote speaker at a Bigfoot festival. And it's always like a mic drop moment. Like, here's why this person's too weird to believe. I just have a problem with the lack of kindness. It makes me sound like such a softie, but I actually think that some of my sort of religious and spiritual training is preparing me to be more open-minded and realistic in these situations than just like, are we just going to say that these people, this many people, they're just weird and crazy and they just like spookies.
Well, it's rhetorically lazy. I mean, so it's frustrating.
It's so lazy.
It's frustrating. It's obviously offensive and frustrating when people use like those kinds of tactics to discredit people's claims. You don't get to win the argument by just saying, well, that person's part of a weird religion, so they must be wrong. It's like, that's not how argument works. That's not how facts work. Like, I've seen this narrative
Sure.
for a while now, and I've seen it from people I really respect too. Like, I won't name any names here, but there's a guy I follow whose writing I really admire and respect, and who a year or so ago when the congressional hearings, I think maybe right before they happened or as they were happening, he basically went and said, like, yeah, this whole thing is a pile of doo-doo. And he kind of made the same, basically drew out the same narrative, except like way, way before this dude with this documentary. All the same stuff. This group of guys who use tax dollars to, like, you know, they basically swindled the Congress out of whatever by making dubious claims about this thing or that thing, and they spend it all on Skinwalker Ranch or something. And here's the thing: it takes all kinds. There are crackpots. There are people who are not very smart. And then there are people who are very, very smart. And there are people who are very trustworthy. And there are people who are grifters. And there are people who are truth seekers. And there are people all over the map in this category, just like every category. And to cherry pick the people or the pursuits or the studies that are stupid, and then use those to essentially generalize across the entire sort of project it's rhetorically lazy. It's bad argumentation. It's bad faith. And it works only because you are catering to an audience that wants you to say that wants to believe you when you say that all these people are crazy. Oops. Take that in front of a bunch of the best of us and see what happens. I feel very comfortable entirely dismissing this thing because to me it is deeply unserious.
Ain't no party like an inherent bias party.
Right on theme.
By their very nature, these kinds of experiences are upsetting, deeply strange, highly personal, and non-replicable. So we're not going to just trot out a body of data going like, we're going to prove the Bigfoot, But that doesn't negate centuries of personal reports and experiences that people have shared about ghosts or poltergeists or objects in the sky, or whatever you say, across the entire world, across every country, every civilization, every society, throughout known history, right? People who have nothing in common and will never meet and lived thousands of years apart, they're talking about the same sort of thing. That is the unifying data point, is the subjects that they say, I saw this or I felt this. And you can't dismiss that. You dismiss that at your own peril. It seems willful to go, nope, they're crazy people. It seems almost like a kind of a hysterical clinginess to a worldview that disallows such realities because you'll just, I don't know, sit in an empty bathtub shivering, for the rest of your life because it'll just break you.
Inflexibility is brittleness. It's weakness.
Yes.
I think how much ego is involved in the conversation is important because I don't think we're going to get very far if we feel like, well, but if I don't leave this conversation smart, then I'm in real trouble. That's the shivering in the bathtub to me. It's like you feel like you don't know who you are anymore because you used to be the guy who said there was no such thing as a UFO. And that, like, for example, an exact quote from this documentary, he's talking about Project Stargate for a fair bit, which is the project that is portrayed in The Men Who Stare at Goats. They were trying to study psychic powers and paranormal phenomena. And Uri Geller was involved, the spoon bender. And he said, but ultimately in 1995, this $20 million paranormal government program was shut down after the CIA determined it was a waste of time because, surprise, surprise, psychic powers aren't real. It's like,
surprise, surprise. The condescension is it's like suffocating.
I mean.
It's like incredible.
You can feel it.
Yeah. It comes from a place of such, frankly, comical ignorance or an incredible, breathtaking, closed-minded dismissal of it all. Where you're just like, oh, I've heard some stuff that may be convincing or might convince some people, but I'm not interested. And you just don't even read it. You don't even listen. You don't even care because you've already made up your mind. And all those people who don't know what you know, well, they're stupid. And I can prove it by showing you what conferences they go to. The nice thing to me is that anybody with half a brain who starts watching this documentary is not going to be able to sit through it. It's not going to speak to anybody but the true believers in his camp. If you show up to that documentary and you really you are scared and you're wanting not to go shiver in the bathtub, but you're like, I don't know how I feel about all these weird things people are saying, and you really don't want any of it to be true. You watch this documentary and you can be like, oh, so glad I can just dismiss all those stupid people saying those stupid things.
I looked through some of the comments on the video, and I will admit, most people were like, thank you, this is great. It's nice to get some names, because a lot of names are dropped as far as people not to trust and people whose stories are just a bunch of bunk. There was one comment in particular that said, I'm so grateful for people like Greenstreet and Mick West for, essentially not just believing everything. And it's like, well, but also believing nothing is also pretty upsetting and unhelpful, I would say. There was also a comment that said, why is the documentary starring Tiger King? Because it's like, why are we listening to Tiger King about this? Because he has a mullet. Stephen Greenstreet has a mullet. So it's like, all right, weirdo, you've got a mullet. No one's going to listen to you. It's all the same. It's just a bunch of schoolyard nonsense to me.
Yeah.
And so it made me think a lot about media literacy as well, and how important that is, and how difficult it's going to continue to be. It's going to get worse.
Yeah.
But even just knowing, like I remember McKay Coppins, who's an Atlantic writer. I was listening to him on a podcast a couple years ago, and he talked about, like, if something you're reading, if an article you're reading is making you mad, just remember that's what it was designed to do. This person's argument is hoping to inflame you. Like, and the truth is that even a documentary, which sometimes we just like, not to say that I know a lot of people don't do this, but a documentary feels like it has a certain amount of gravitas. Somebody put this together. He's saying he's a reporter, that he's investigated them for decades. You know?
Objectivity.
Yes, objectivity is very important. You know, there's such a thing as an observational documentary where the director gets involved as little as possible, and still where they place the camera is a perspective. You know, so an expository documentary like this is just speech and debate. And you're not hearing the opposite side. And just remembering that when we're watching things like this, that there is an argument being made, which means there's probably an alternate argument and maybe 6 or 7 other different points on a much larger spectrum than we're realizing. So that's one thing I thought about. He gets into the TikTok video. He gets into Sarah Graham, who is a Pentagon scientist who claims that in 2012 she died in surgery and then came back with psychic powers after having an NDE. Talked about Kevin Brown, who was experiencing hauntings after staying at the Shining Hotel, and then he talked a lot about David Grush. And he finishes off by saying, in 2024, Sean Kirkpatrick, who is the director of ARRW, the Pentagon's current UFO office, released a report debunking the claims of these Pentagon true believers. After retiring from the Pentagon, Kirkpatrick stated that there is a zealous paranormal religion inside the U.S. government, and he says this religion is a potential national security threat. This is like what I mean by religion. It's like a
I see.
It's a derogatory term that is being used, like, you're starting a religion. No, you have a religion over there. That's a religion. You know, like I feel like that's a scary word to use to describe people who are behaving in a way that's misunderstood to others. Like, I'm just intrigued by the use of that and basically the fear tactic of it.
I don't think these people are talking about religion, or they use the word religion, but what their intended meaning is zealotry. And you can have people who are absolute zealots of any stripe, and they don't have to subscribe to a religion or a belief in a God or any sort of that thing that we normally associate with religion. It's simply that they are true believers and absolute warriors to defend their unshakable belief. And debunkers are zealots, right? Skeptics are not.
I think that's a really helpful distinction. I guess this is how I feel. As a novice, all I can do is gather data, and how I fill the gaps matters. That's all we're really doing. We've got this person's story. We have this little piece of data. We have this grainy video. If you're filling these gaps with total certainty, it just seems like a mistake. How could you have total certainty with this really crazy spectrum of data? It's true with religion as well. When we assume the mind of God, for example, like, well, this is the rule, and it's because if you don't do the rule, you're bad. But then we find out maybe 10, 15, 20 years later that the rule was actually pretty homophobic or extremely racist. And then we find out, oh, perhaps that didn't, it's when we try to fill the gaps with our own limited systems, which at the time might have involved homophobia, might have involved racism, that we end up really limiting what really matters in a situation. So it does feel like, weirdly, my religious background is still applying to these subjects at all.
You're talking about power relationships, right? The same thing that I was talking about with my thing, power-based relationships that are predicated upon, dominance, right? And subversion or submission. And those aren't real human relationships, right? Those are contingent relationships. Yeah. Where your whatever is contingent upon someone doing the thing that you need them to do.
Yeah. Transactional, conditional.
Thank you. Transactional. They're transactional.
Yeah.
And therefore not real, not authentic.
Can I highly, highly recommend, if our listeners, and probably a lot of our listeners at this point also listen to the excellent Cosmosis podcast with Kelly Chase, but her episode number 11 came out June 19th, which is just a few weeks ago. The UFO narrative wars, weaponized belief in the age of disclosure. One of the best sort of breakdowns of how hard it is to know anything at all when it comes to government and UFOs, or any kind of paranormal anything, but especially UFOs, of that entire conversation, that as soon as you venture into that sort of arena of information or ideas or conversation, you automatically are subscribing to chaos and not knowing what's going on. And that the moment that you think you know what's going on is probably the moment that you are the most deceived. This is what I get out of an artifact like that documentary, Mal, is that it, to me, is just part of the circus. To the extent that someone has a narrative that they think this is the truth, like, I know the truth, this is what happened, this is what it is.
Yes.
It's not true. It is like the only thing you can guarantee is that what they are saying is not reliable. like you've got to listen to people's stories who are like, I don't really know. Like, this is what I know. I know my experience. And then you have to decide whether or not that person is trustworthy. And that's it. And then in the aggregate, what you wind up with is a sort of a pointillated picture of something that emerges. But you cannot watch a documentary like that and think you're getting anything but a cooked narrative. So don't believe it. Don't watch it. Don't even participate.
It reminds me of the conversation that we had right after the congressional hearing, because, Tom, when you were talking about how these stories, I remember thinking as I was watching the congressional hearing about the Me Too movement, because it's the same with sexual abuse and sexual assault. Like, those stories are often, you can't catch them on camera. It's a he said, she said situation. The person who has been victimized or abused is often their character is attacked, and everything about them that could make them look crazy is brought up. And we end up with a movement like Me Too, where we had thought about women who were sleeping their way to the top, and these people who can't get jobs anymore because nobody wants to work with them because they got blacklisted or whatever, only to find out that the aggregate is that a lot of women were being treated in a way that was unconscionable. And then the tectonic plates shift, and we look at the whole conversation differently. And I just think this moment is calling for something very similar, where it's like,
oh my God, yes,
the aggregate of
so
all
much.
Of these unproved claims,
this is what we're we are here to bear witness to the experiencers, right?
And I think that it's important to always remember that just because some people lie doesn't mean everyone is lying. And like, that is so hard to freaking get through to people's heads. It's like, just because some of these stories aren't true doesn't mean that none of the stories are true. That is absolutely characterized in the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement, there was some BS that came out. There were some people who lied. There were some people who exploited the movement and did some things that are really unfortunate. But that does not mean that there was no such thing as widespread abuse of women. And it's the same thing here. Yeah. We need to be open-minded. We need to keep our hearts and our minds open. We need to listen.
So I knew this conversation was going to be so rich. That's why I wanted to talk to you about it, because I knew both of you would have lots of beautiful things to say. And I do like that the conversation is actually a lot about kindness, frankly, and listening. Always. And actually appreciating or trying to understand the individual versus being like, sorry, the collective says you're nuts, you're weird. And it made me immediately think of a commencement speech at Northwestern that was given by J.B. Pritzker, a couple months ago. And he talks about the best way to spot an idiot. He said, the best way to spot an idiot, look for the person that is cruel. Let me explain. When we see someone who doesn't look like us or sound like us or act like us, love like us or live like us, the first thought that crosses almost everyone's brain is rooted in either fear or judgment or both. That's evolution. We survived as a species by being suspicious of things that we aren't familiar with. In order to be kind, we have to shut down that animal instinct and force our brain to travel a different pathway. Empathy and compassion are evolved states of being. They require the mental capacity to step past our most primal urges. Cruelty is seen by some as an adroit cudgel to gain power.
Empathy and kindness are considered weak. Many important people look at the vulnerable only as rungs on a ladder to the top. I'm here to tell you that when someone's path through this world is marked with acts of cruelty, they have failed the first test of an advanced society. They never forged a new mental pathway to overcome their own instinctual fears. And so their thinking and problem solving will lack the imagination and creativity that the kindest people have in spades. Over my many years in politics and business, I have found one thing to be universally true. The kindest person in the room is often the smartest.
That's a better indictment.
Beautiful.
That's a better indictment of the documentary than I think any of us could have managed. So that's pretty great.
I really, really do think that's what we're trying to do, which is why I believe in it.
Once you said, Mal, that attention was a form of love and my soul was restored.
Yes.
I think about it all the time.
Yeah.
Tom, Mal, it's time, finally, to talk about psychedelics. And the first thing we need to establish is that the umbrella term psychedelics covers an array of compounds that are frankly much more different than they are similar.
Yeah.
The only thing that all of them really have in common is that they do things in our brain that changes it, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for your whole life. So to put them all into the same category is sort of like putting stitches and insulin into the same category. What do they have in common? Both of them are medical interventions for the body, and the brain, it turns out, is orders of magnitude more complex than any other part of the body. For instance, lots of people are familiar with magic mushrooms. You might also know that the psychoactive compound in magic mushrooms is psilocybin, which does all kinds of things to the brain that we don't really understand. But the effects can range from hallucinations to complete ego death, i.e. a complete break from spatial and temporal continuity. And we also know that it dramatically increases neuroplasticity and causes an explosion of new neural pathways and connections. MDMA, otherwise known as ecstasy or Molly, that drug young people do while they're making out at parties, it has nothing to do with hallucinations or ego death or warping the user's perception of reality. Instead, Molly ratchets up your empathy to 11 and takes away all your social fear. So you tend to love everyone and want to tell them all your secrets. Fun fact, and MDMA is one of the primary ingredients in actual so-called truth serums. Anyway, the point is, both psilocybin and MDMA are called psychedelics, so you can see how big of an umbrella that term is. But we're not here to talk about either of those drugs. We're here to talk about DMT, which might be, guys, it might be one of the weirdest of all, actually. I'm not even sure where to begin. For starters, DMT is endogenously produced within the human body, which means we already produce it in very small quantities in our brains, sort of like we already produce things like dopamine and serotonin. And also, we seem to produce a lot more DMT during things like near-death experiences. So there's a lot of suspicion that taking DMT is sort of like triggering a fake NDE, which is wild. But it's not exactly here what I'm here to talk about either. What I'm here to talk about is that apparently a lot of people, like almost all of the people who have done DMT, have reported encountering quote-unquote alien intelligences, or more accurately, non-human beings that seem vastly more intelligent than us. This is so common that people who study this stuff have coined the term DMT aliens. Last year, a friend of mine told me about his DMT experience, and part of it was him meeting what looked to him like an alien, a skinny, big eyes, gray skin, etc., who tapped his forehead and showed him the universe. Maybe we'll have him on the show to talk about it one day. But
the alien or your friend?
I mean, I would prefer the alien.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have the technological capacity to have a DMT alien on the show, but if we ever figure it out, for sure. So there is, of course, a debate about whether DMT aliens are real, objective beings, or whether they are psychological phantoms that emerge from the parts of the brain that are triggered by DMT. Well, just last month, a neurobiologist named Andrew Gallimore came out with a book that has what I think is probably one of the best titles I've ever heard. It's called Death by Astonishment.
Oh, wow.
The subtitle is Confronting the Mystery of the World's Strangest Drug. Tell me you don't want to read this book. The author, Gallimore, has a PhD in biological chemistry from the University of Cambridge, and he's notable because he's been a vocal critic of a lot of other claims associated with psychedelics. Unsurprisingly, psychedelic enthusiasts tend to exaggerate the mystical powers of the drugs that they love. But when it comes to DMT aliens, Gallimore is convinced. In a recent interview with Double Blind magazine, They asked him what convinced him, and he said it was the first 30 seconds of his first DMT trip. Of course, he said, my personal conviction remains a matter of private revelation. I certainly wouldn't claim that the case is settled scientifically. He says he wrote Death by Astonishment to, quote, explain why I think the case is strong and needs to be taken seriously. So, what is his case that DMT aliens are real? Well, if you boil down the possible explanations for a DMT trip, the exotic, incomprehensible world that trippers experience is either real or it's generated entirely by the brain. But as something of an expert in brain sciences, Gallimore doesn't think the brain is actually capable of fabricating, quote, entirely non-human worlds in such exquisite and dynamic detail and complexity, end quote. Which means the experience of someone on DMT might be constructed by outside unseen entities, aka aliens, even if they are doing this by using the human brain's own world-building tools. In his book, Gallimore writes, quote, it is a world that should not exist, and yet there it is, irresistible in its construction and undeniable in its presence. To smoke DMT means to confront not merely a different world, but one that is, frankly, impossible, end quote. His theory is supported by the fact that people consistently report encountering the same types of beings, visiting similar impossible architectures, and receiving information they couldn't have known any other way. The point here, for Gallimore, isn't to uncover some conclusive truth about who or what people might see during a DMT trip, but that the experiences demand humility, which seems to be a real theme today for us. To quote him one more time, it only takes a few seconds for DMT to obliterate our most cherished assumptions about who we are, where we are, and how advanced we really are, even if we lack the cognitive apparatus to make sense of it.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
I've been dying to talk to you guys about this.
Now you
So-
freaking out.
I am. I love to freak out, actually. It's such a good feeling. I get so sweaty. Like immediately. So the implication is that DMT is potentially like a
Portal.
that it's allowing us to universe hop, or what am I saying? Not universe, dimension hop or something.
Something.
It gives us access to the plane.
So if Gallimore is right, there's a genuine connection with a non-human intelligence when you smoke this freaking drug, then what I would assume is that what it's doing is like activating parts of your brain that allow you to connect to these outside entities.
Exactly. Or that potentially help you see a larger reality than our brains, like our filter brains let us see.
Okay, so many questions. Is he compiling data based on experiencer reports? And he's showing in aggregate they're meeting a certain kind of non-human intelligence. They're visiting a certain kind of sort of impossible geography, right?
There is certainly an aggregate of reports. There are certainly like a lot of studies that have been done by this. He's standing on the shoulders of other scientists that he, one of the analogies that came to mind for me is, let's say you wanted to study the architecture of a building. Would you be able to study that architecture better by going into the building yourself or by asking other people about their experiences of going into the building? So it makes sense to me that his best evidence would be his own experience on DMT. As somebody who has gained expertise in neurosciences.
No.
Isn't there a long history of the chemists or whatever first guinea pig being themselves?
Yes, absolutely.
What is this? I wonder how this, don't want to do this on my grandma. Let me see if I can get through it. Do people have horrible DMT experiences? Like some near-death experiencers wind up in hell, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not many, but it happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think here's what I know about DMT, and I unfortunately I don't know as much as I would like to know. It is a drug that is become much more interesting to me recently. Like I haven't
do it.
I haven't known.
He's gonna do it. He's gonna do it, guys.
We're just going to film an episode of each of us in a room.
Here's what I know is that the trip itself, like in real time, quote unquote, it lasts for just a few minutes. Like your whole DMT trip is going to start and end within like 10 minutes or like you smoke it and then like 10 minutes later, you are not tripping anymore. But during that time, it can be like people have a wide variety of experiences, but reportedly you can feel like you lived entire lifetimes in that amount of time.
Jordan, it's okay if this isn't something you were able to get specifics on, but I want to know everything about the aliens. Like if they were similar to each other or...
There are a lot of reports of similar looking or seeming beings, but that isn't
like
to say that they are all the
that
same.
We picture though, right? Like that are on T-shirts and that we see, you know, I'd be curious about people who might not be as familiar with that image.
Well, so my impression is that if you are witnessing a being, that it's not necessarily a biological being you're witnessing. Rather, it's sort of an avatar that that some outside intelligence used your brain to create to communicate to you that there's someone there with you, right? So it's like it doesn't actually matter what it looks like because it's not embodied, not in that sense, not in your brain or whatever.
And people would make the same arguments about not just religious experiences, but NDEs specifically.
Yeah.
That some people meet God, some people meet loved ones, but... it's often formed around that person's experience with life.
Right.
If they're Christian,
Yeah.
then they might meet Jesus. Yep. And that doesn't necessarily mean that is not an avatar of something larger that we don't understand.
So the only thing that Gallimore seems certain of is that there are non-human intelligences involved in these trips that are vastly, vastly more intelligent than we are. To the point that I think one of his quotes was that like we don't even, our level of intelligence on the scale of potential intelligence doesn't even register as intelligence. That's his takeaway.
There's a story that when the Beatles first got turned on to marijuana and Paul McCartney got high, he spent the next 8 hours babbling to their assistant, Mal Evans, I think, and asking him to write down everything he said because he was basically given the keys to the universe, and the next day it was shown to be utter nonsense. A lot of the times when people have these experiences where they're massively enlightened or shown things that are astonishing and incredible, that inevitably fades like a dream upon waking, you know. And I'm wondering, like, the person, your friend who was touched on the forehead, does he remember what he learned or was shown, or did it dissipate?
That's a great question. No, I think this is pretty common with DMT trippers too, is that you have this sense of like, I know that I saw so much, but I cannot remember like any of it.
Or even articulate it.
Yeah, and certainly not articulate it. And sometimes the impression of it all stays. And like you can feel it but you can't put it into words. You know, it's kind of like if you are from a community that lives in a landlocked area and then you travel to the coast and you see the ocean and it like blows your mind and it's amazing and you want to tell people about it, and so you grab a handful of water and you bring it back to your village and you're like, this is the ocean, you know. It's like it's not untrue. It is a little part of the ocean, but it's just such a sort of hilariously inadequate way to represent the thing that you saw. And so this seems to be really, really common among people, especially with this kind of thing. One of the things that I find interesting about the DMT experience for people is that it seems to be so vivid and tangible for them. Whereas like a lot of the psychedelic experience people have is like you sort of lose your mind for a while. And then you come back and you're like, man, things are weird and crazy or whatever. But with DMT, it's like, no, I went to a place. I felt like I was there. It was so physically real to me, realer than real. You know, like it was so vivid that it was like even more than like, you know, just like this life feels like a dream because of how real that felt.
I don't want to go to a place that feels more real than my life and then have to come back. That freaks me out. But I won't. I've been like this since I was little. Like I watched Jaws way too young and then became obsessed with sharks forever afterward. Like I'm in my 8th grade project. I had to work all semester on a 30-page paper and then give a speech about severed feet that were found in a shark's stomach. That's how obsessed I was with sharks after being scared. So I'm afraid of DMT, but I'm officially obsessed is all I'm saying. It's called magnetic repulsion.
The upside, Mal, not that I'm rushing to smoke DMT. The upside is apparently the kindness and generosity that we encounter at the NHI help desk during the 10 that your ticket is called. Oh, you poor thing. You know, let me help a little. Yeah.
I think, again, I'll reread that last quote where he said, it only takes a few seconds for DMT to obliterate our most cherished assumptions about who we are, where we are, and how advanced we really are.
That's great.
Well, before we go, we want to give everyone a fair warning that ads are coming to the show. I don't want this to take everyone by surprise. This is always going to happen, but because ads are, unfortunately, the main way humble podcasters like us get roofs and food, we were just waiting until the right time. Well, it turns out that time has come. As of this recording, we've signed to join a pretty big podcast network. It's launching in a few weeks, and we will be talking about that more later. But also, if you want to keep your listening experience pristine and never hear a single ad on the show, you can do that by taking out a paid subscription on our Substack over at ggupodcast.substack.com. Ad-free episodes will always be a perk our supporters can take for granted, and you'll also get bonus episodes, invites to monthly virtual hangouts, and whatever else we can think of to demonstrate our undying love. Am I missing something?
Suffice to say that Substack will, our Substack will provide supplemental materials that you're not going to get anywhere else.
And paid subscribers will get even more stuff. So come on over if you haven't yet.
And always, we want to hear from you.
Oh, God,
We
yes.
love suggestions and we love stories and
Yep.
we love you.
By the way, we've been, yes, end on that.
If you're new here, be sure to check out our Substack, where you can find a lot more cool stuff and share your own stories with us. Just head over to godsghostsufos.com or find the link in the description. Also, a quick reminder that no matter where you're listening, reviews really, really help other people find the show. So, hint, hint, please leave us one. All right, thanks again. See ya.